What is up, YouTube? It's your girl Evelyn, and today I'll be tier ranking a handful of spooky Sapphics from various television shows and films. Because
why not? Fuck it.
Before we dive in, here's a super quick breakdown of the tiers. The first and lowest tier is Girl Please, as in, girl please, I've read Goosebumps scarier than you. The next tier is Leave the Light On. Now, these Sapphics aren't all that spooky, but I also wouldn't want to run into any of them in a dark alley at night. I Rebuke Thee is the mid tier, and these Sapphics don't scare me per se, but they do freak me the f out. The runner-up tier is Bedwetter. Now, let's say I woke up at 3 a.m. with an overwhelming urge to pee, but I heard one of these Sapphics waiting for me outside of my bedroom door. I think you can guess the rest. The last and spookiest tier is I'm Trippin'. New scenario. You and I are running together in an empty field, and one of these Sapphics is chasing us. I'm tripping you.
Did you get it?
Also, be warned, I will be spoiling every single movie featured in this video. I'm kicking things off with the Sapphic that just might be the spookiest looking on the list, Eerie from Eerie, a Filipino horror film set in an all-girls Catholic school that happens to be super duper duper haunted.
Hindi ko sinasadya. Clara, sino pumatay sa'yo?
Even though there are several ghost girls roaming around this school, Eerie is that bitch. She spends the entire movie manipulating the kind-hearted and very attractive school counselor who only wants to help Eerie find peace so she can move on to the afterlife and stop haunting the school and murdering the girls. Eventually, we find out when Eerie was alive, she was severely bullied for eating butterflies.
What the
She was also bullied for being into the ladies, and even though I do feel somewhat bad for Eerie, I would absolutely catch a heart attack if I saw her in my rearview mirror. So when it comes to Eerie, I'm tripping.
'Cause you had a bad day, you're taking one down, you said
I know what you're thinking. Sydney from I Am Not Okay With This is a good guy. She's the protagonist, the main character if you will. She's who we're supposed to root for. And you're right, but she also explodes people's heads.
Shut up, just shut up!
Get this. Sydney claims
Shut
that
up!
she had...
I Am Not Okay With This is basically a modern-day take on Carrie. Well, minus the religious zealotry and time period appropriate aesthetic. And look, I feel bad for Sydney and Carrie. They're both unpopular outcasts with rocky home lives, but they also have the ability to kill at will when they're angry. Sorry, Sid, but I rebuke thee.
Now I will tell you what I've done for you.
Although it's never been confirmed that Mrs. Danvers from Hitchcock's 1940 thriller Rebecca is sapphically inclined, for our intents and purposes, we're gonna assume she's gay and a little evil.
You've nothing to live for, really, have you? Look down there. It's easy, isn't it? Why don't you? Why don't you?
As head housekeeper of a stately manor, Mrs. Danvers really shouldn't be all that spooky, but it's her dangerous obsession with Rebecca, her deceased mistress, that lands Mrs. Danvers on the list. And even though Rebecca is dead when the movie begins, her spirit still has a chokehold over the heartbroken Mrs. Danvers, which eventually leads to her violent, fiery demise at her own hands. Now, Mrs. Danvers is a very specific type of spooky Sapphic who's really only dangerous to like 3 or 4 people, but she is very dangerous to those people. And if she was ever caught roaming around my town, I would make sure to leave the light on.
Cat and mouse game always starts the same. First we're both down a plate and somehow
Jackie from What Keeps You Alive is basically a queer Black Widow. She hops from spouse to spouse, leaving a trail of bodies in her wake and a stack of bands in her bank.
Why would your wife do this to you? Probably thinking, we're in love, right?
What turned you into this monster?
It's nature, not nurture.
Jackie and her current wife are spending the weekend in a cabin in the woods, and not even a remote cabin in the woods. There are neighbors and even a highway nearby. Now, maybe it's the hood in me, but I don't understand why no one in this movie beat Jackie's ass. Her wife had ample opportunity to beat her ass, as did the neighbors, but nobody did. I could very well be wrong, but it seemed to me that Jackie's skill set consisted of only hunting and shooting rifles, which she clearly wasn't even that good at because it took her the entire movie to kill her wife. But I do know Jackie's role was originally written for a man, and it shows. But because I'm pretty sure I could kick Jackie's ass, it's a girl please for me.
It's dangerous to be a woman in love. I'm walking.
The main character in the super bizarre horror film Knife Plus Heart is Anne, a lesbian producer of gay adult films.
Should that be an oxymoron?
Even though Anne's technically not the villain of Knife Plus Heart, she definitely acts in some very villainous ways.
Votre acteur a été poignardé, une mort particulièrement violente.
Carl venait de tourner dans un de mes films.
Quel genre de film exactement?
Oh, arrêtez votre charme, faites pas le coup des types qui sont pas renseignés.
Basically, out of nowhere, a random serial killer begins targeting actors that are starring in Anne's films. But instead of halting production until the killer is caught, Anne begins producing films based on the murders, which is a horrible fucking thing to do. What makes it worse is the only reason she's doing it is to win back her ex-girlfriend, who recently dumped her after 10 years together. And before you try to give Anne the benefit of the doubt, just know that during the film, she very much essays her girlfriend. I'm not gonna pretend to understand what Knife Plus Heart is other than a very strange art house horror film that's more campy than horrific. It's typically the kind of movie I hate, and Anne is typically the type of character I don't like. But for some reason, I didn't hate this movie, and I also liked Anne. A little. And even though Anne is far from the spookiest Sapphic on the list, I still rebuke thee.
Never been a scared bitch. You know how I'm rocking if them hoes ever.
I want to take a quick trip back to 2018 and the first season of Killing Eve, possibly one of the best first seasons of any television show I've ever watched.
Why, Bill?
He was slowing you down. Oh, don't do that.
I'm sure by now, most of you at least know the basic premise of Killing Eve. Bad girl assassin meets good girl security operative, and murderous, shadowy shenanigans ensue. To be clear, Villanelle is the baddest of bitches in every season of Killing Eve, but there was something absolutely terrifying about season 1 Villanelle that seemed to diminish over time. I don't know if it was the newness of the character or the fact that Eve and Villanelle barely interacted during the season, but I just remember feeling incredibly uneasy whenever Villanelle was on screen and finding all of her interactions to be unsettling. Therefore, if I ever hear Villanelle skulking around outside my bedroom door, rest assured my sheets will need to be changed in the morning, but not in the good way.
Okay, first things first, I'll eat your brains. Then I'ma start rocking gold.
Samantha from Contracted is one of the more sympathetic, spooky Sapphics on the list. The poor thing gets dumped, drugged, assaulted, and infected with a degenerative disease that eventually transforms her into the Walking Dead. Admittedly, Samantha does start killing people before she fully becomes a zombie, and not to make excuses for murder, but most of the characters in this movie are just plain awful, and even though I have all the sympathy in the world for Samantha, I wouldn't touch her with a 10-foot pole, and I am most definitely tripping.
I think I'm going crazy. Oh Lord.
Marie from High Tension is pretty much the psychotic killer lesbian trope times 100. She's secretly in love with her best friend Alex, which naturally leads her to murder Alex's entire family, including the dog, as well as anyone else Marie happens to come across. My favorite thing about Marie has to be how she indirectly blames Alex for the murders she commits because, quote unquote, Alex is a little slut who could drive a woman crazy.
What kind of shit is that?
Despite its flaws, High Tension has been one of my favorite guilty pleasure slashers for years. It's messy as hell and seemingly not very well thought out, which I actually think adds to its brutal charm. And Marie herself is truly terrifying, not just because she's really skilled at viciously murdering people, but she's also delusional and a literal danger to every single person she meets, which means when it comes to Marie, I'm trippin'. That is it for the video. I want to give a quick shout out to my newest patrons, Cassie, Jessica, and Theodora. As always, thank you so much for watching, and be sure to let me know which Sapphic you think is the spookiest, and I'll see you in the next one.